Stories. Israeli forces kill Al Jazeera correspondent Anas al-Sharif and 4 colleagues in a targeted strike on their media tent near Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. Israel claims al-Sharif was a Hamas cell leader, while rights groups say he was targeted for his frontline reporting. Israel has now stepped up its military operations in Gaza after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered to take full control of Gaza City to defeat Hamas and free hostages, while the UN Security Council fears fresh calls for a ceasefire and more aid to the Palestinian enclave. Israel has now stepped up its military operations in Gaza after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered to take full control of Gaza City to defeat Hamas and free hostages, while the UN Security Council hears fresh calls for a ceasefire and more aid to the Palestinian enclave. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that making concessions to Russian President Vladimir Putin would not end the war. His remarks come ahead of President Trump and President Putin's expected talks on upcoming Friday. Colombian hopeful presidential candidate Miguel Uribe, 39, has passed away 2 months after being shot twice in the head at a campaign event in Bogota, with authorities arresting 6 suspects, including a 15-year-old. Vice President Francia Marquez has condemned the killing, while U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio demanded justice. The Nigerian military killed over 100 members of a criminal gang known as bandits in a joint air and ground raid on Sunday in Makari Forest, Zamfara State, according to a conflict monitoring report. The operation marks one of the deadliest clashes in northwest Nigeria's ongoing fight against armed groups. South Korea and Vietnam pledged stronger economic and strategic ties during a summit in Seoul, as President Lee Jae-myung hosts Vietnamese leader to Lam. Talks focus on expanding trade and investment amid global market challenges. China's Coast Guard says it took necessary measures to expel Philippine vessels from waters around Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. It says the operation was professional and legal, while Manila has not yet commented. French President Emmanuel Macron today has slammed Israel's plans to step up its military operations in Gaza as a disaster waiting to happen. Macron has proposed an international coalition under a United Nations mandate to stabilize Gaza. Last week, Israel's Security Cabinet had approved a plan to take control of Gaza City entirely. Macron said the announcement heralds a disaster of unprecedented gravity and move towards a never-ending war, adding that the Israeli hostages and that the people of Gaza will continue to be the primary victims of this strategy. Meanwhile, reportedly, Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israel was approaching the end of the war in Gaza in a speech at the opening of the new Knesset Museum. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Jonathan Hoffman. He's a former Vice President of Zionist Federation of the United Kingdom. Joins us live from London. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us as always. Good to see you. Thank you. Now, Netanyahu has stated that Israel is approaching end of the war in Gaza. Do you believe this declaration is realistic?
It's very hard to say when the end will be. because, number one, there are still 50 hostages, of whom 20 are thought to be alive in Gaza. And number two, Hamas is still firing rockets into Israel. What Netanyahu had said last week was that the Israel Defense Force will take over central Gaza, including Gaza City, but the inhabitants have until October the 7th to move out. So certainly the war is not going to finish, certainly before October the 7th, and probably not before the end of the year, realistically. So I think it's very difficult to predict when the end date will be. I don't think anybody, any expert would hazard to say when the war would finish.
So Jonathan, why do you think that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said this? Do you think he's trying to gain more support amid ongoing conflict and amid diplomatic tensions even within Israel and disagreements within his military as well as his cabinet?
That could well be on the mark. It could be correct. Obviously, there's been a lot of criticism of the announcement that the IDF is going to take over Gaza City. And, I think people are saying, well, when is the end going to be? And I certainly think we're nearly 2 years since October the 7th, 2023, when the hostages were taken. I think it's pretty unlikely this is going to last another year. I think sometime within the next year, we probably would see an end to the hostilities. And I think that's what Netanyahu is hinting at, that it's just not going to be a conflict that goes on forever. But quite when the date will be, the exact date, it's impossible to say.
Thank you, Jonathan, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we stay in the region. Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani has lambasted Israel for killing journalists working for its Al Jazeera network in the Gaza Strip, describing the deaths as crimes beyond imagination. This comes as reportedly 5 Al Jazeera journalists have been killed by an Israeli strike near Gaza City's Al-Shifa hospital. The Israeli military admitted in a statement that it targeted an Al Jazeera correspondent, Anas al-Sharif, labeling the reporter as a terrorist, saying that he had served as the head of a terrorist cell in Hamas. Now for this discussion, we go back to Jonathan Hoffman. He's a former vice president of Zionist Federation of the United Kingdom. Thank you, Jonathan, for staying with us. Now, Qatar's prime minister has condemned the killing of journalists, calling it a crime beyond imagination. How do you respond to these accusations, especially with Israel's claim being different?
Well, Israel says that it has documentary evidence that Anas al-Sharif was a terrorist. They published documentation previously that he was a leader of Hamas. And, it just depends who you believe. The IDF would claim that it certainly doesn't attack journalists for the sake of attacking journalists. That would be completely wrong. But there have been several cases where Palestinians have claimed to be journalists, and in fact, they've had terrorist connections, Hamas connections. So, all one can say is that the Israelis have published information to suggest that Anas al-Sharif was a Hamas leader.
And Jonathan, what steps can Israel take to balance military actions with the protection of journalists in conflict zones?
Well, international journalists are not allowed into Gaza. There have been a number of complaints from the BBC journalists, from other journalists, that they're not allowed into Gaza. But the problem is, number one, obviously the safety factor. Number two, that everything that comes out of Gaza is vetted by Hamas. And so anything that comes out from Gaza through a journalist, one has to realize that unless Hamas approves of it, it won't be published.
Thank you.
So Israel, the morality, the IDF operates by very strong codes of ethics, codes of morals, and the idea that they would deliberately target journalists is just not credible.
Right. Thank you very much, Jonathan Hoffman, for always joining us and sharing your insight all the way from London. Now we move on to our next news. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is gravely concerned about the repeated targeting of journalists, his spokesperson said today, after 5 reporters were killed in an Israeli airstrike. His spokesperson said that reporters covering conflicts are afforded protection under international humanitarian law and must be able to carry out their work safely. Meanwhile, the United Nations Human Rights Office has also criticized Israel over the killings. In a post on X, the United Nations said it condemns the killing of the journalists and urged Israel to respect and protect all civilians, including members of the press, and to grant immediate, safe, and unhindered access to Gaza for all journalists. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Jonathan Hoffman. Thank you, Jonathan, for staying with us. Now, British Prime Minister has also expressed concern over the reported targeting of journalists. So how's this condemnation in the context of international pressure on Israel to protect journalists regardless of what they are saying?
As I said before, Israel doesn't target journalists for the sake of it. There have been a number of cases where Palestinians have posed as journalists, whereas in fact they've been associated with Hamas, or they've been even leaders of Hamas. It's all very well for Keir Starmer to warn Israel to protect journalists, but the fact is Israel would say, and the IDF would say, that they simply do not attack journalists for the sake of it. Why would they? The action of Israel is not popular anyway in the eyes of many world leaders, including Keir Starmer. So why would the IDF and Israel make things worse by deliberately targeting journalists? I personally don't believe they do deliberately target journalists. Where journalists are fake, where people say they're journalists, it's easy enough to put a jacket on saying journalist on the back. There's nothing to stop them doing that. So, we know that there have been a number of cases of people posing as journalists where they haven't been journalists.
Thank you, Jonathan Hoffman, for joining us today and sharing your insight throughout our news. Thank you. Now we move on to our next news. Zelensky has said that making concessions will not persuade Russia to end hostilities. He emphasized the need to increase pressure on Moscow, stating that Russia shows no genuine interest in stopping the war. This statement comes as U.S. President Donald Trump is set to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. The meeting raises questions about the future of diplomatic efforts amid ongoing conflict. President Zelensky's call highlights the urgency of a firm international stance as tensions remain high. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Major General Sudhakarji. He's a senior geopolitical and strategic defense expert. Thank you, Major General Sudhakarji, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, President Zelensky has stated that making concessions will not persuade Russia to end hostilities. What's your analysis and why do you think he's saying this?
Soma, good evening. Thank you for getting me to your show.
Thank you.
Coming straight to the question which you have raised, he's saying this because he knows that ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine is not that simple and easy. He knows that it's a very complex issue. He knows that nothing is in the hands of Donald Trump to impose peace and restore stability and normalcy in the region. He knows that it's driven by a very deep-rooted intention and motive by forces who are invisible way back in America. If at all there is a conflict which is raging between Russia and Ukraine for so long, then it is some people in America who are responsible, about whom Donald Trump will do good if he speaks to right people, takes their view, goes deeper into the issue, and identify the root cause of the ongoing conflict. Why am I saying is that it is very simple to make a statement that the war or the conflict will be brought to an end. But it is very difficult to diagnose the disease. Unless the disease is diagnosed, the doctor will not be able to find and give the right kind of prescription. Back to you, Asim.
And building on that, what do international allies such as the US and Europe play in applying this pressure to Russia?
Essentially, the narrative which is being built by the Westerners is based on a paradigm or intention of restoring the status of the transatlantic relationship, which is actually declining. If you go deeper into the issue, you will come and stop here. Because there are certain issues because of which the transatlantic relationship, based on which the global apex architecture is existing today, in order to give rules-based international order. Since that is not working out, the Ukraine is being made a proxy and the war against Russia is being orchestrated so as to galvanize or keep the transatlantic resources of the countries together. Otherwise, they are falling apart. So the deep state, which is predominated in USA, the primary aim is to continue with the conflict, let the economy of USA benefit, let the defense industry benefit, at the same time keep the forces who are party to this transatlantic architecture or the NATO together, keep them galvanized as long as possible, because the moment they break, the global architecture of peace and normalcy will also collapse. So this is one. Second point that I wish to highlight in short is that putting pressure on Russia is just closing the eyes to the basic fundamental reason or the diagnosis that I left in the last question was incorrect diagnosis of the disease. Russia attacked Ukraine on 24th of February 2022. Why did it attack? That is the moot question which is to be answered. If at all it attacked, it was with some purpose. There was some threat to insecurity to Russia, which despite best efforts of Putin, he could not actually resist or stop this expansion of NATO forces towards the east. And Russia was getting surrounded by forces inimical to its existence. So therefore, unless the insecurities are addressed, I don't think they will be able to make any headway. Last but not the least is that they are keeping the pressure on Russia, thinking that Russia one day will be bled to death. Number two, it will collapse. It will become non-existent. I am afraid more pressure they put on Russia, more stronger it becomes. It will be defensible, it will be formidable in times ahead, How long are they going to keep imposing sanctions? Since 2014, more than 16,000 is the bottom line, and the maximum line is 30,000 sanctions have been imposed on Russia. And in addition to the sanctions, there are many other restrictions. The forex reserve has been actually frozen, and that money is being utilized to the budget or give funds to Ukraine to continue with the offensive or counter the offensive of Russia. Back to you, Asim.
Thank you, Major General, for stating those points. Thank you very much. Please stay with us as well. We come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, India has accused Pakistan of Sabre rattling after reports claimed Army Chief Asim Munir issued nuclear threats during a U.S. visit. Indian media quoted Munir as saying Pakistan would take half of the world down if pushed to the brink. Pakistan has not confirmed the remarks, and an official speech version omitted them. India's foreign ministry called the comments irresponsible and regrettable, especially made in a friendly third country. Both India and Pakistan possess nuclear weapons. The incident comes amid strained India-US ties, following Washington's renewed engagement with Islamabad and disagreements over a May ceasefire. Munir was in the US for a CENTCOM event. Now we go back to our guest discussion with retired Major General Sudhakarji. Thank you, Major General Sudhakarji, for staying with us. Now, how shocking is this news that has just come in, and how shocking is the fact that this statement was made in US?
Asuma, very good question raised by you. It is actually Pakistan is being made a proxy to play a game against India by USA. It is as simple as that. So Pakistan may not be wanting to use such kind of saber rattling to put pressure on India. However, since he's making these statements from the soil of USA, it goes to say that Pakistan Chief of the Army Staff or Field Marshal Munir, he has tacit support, he has implicit blessings of United States of America's administration. Having said that, let me also remind Pakistan as also USA that it's easy to saber rattle on issue related to something sensitive and very dangerous as nuclear weapon. And it's very difficult to bring in some sense and rationality before we start making comments loosely in an irresponsible manner, as if they're basic toys to be played by the children. These are highly irresponsible in 21st century, highly incorrect statements being made by somebody as senior as a field marshal. Field marshal is the senior-most rank in any structure in any armed forces in the world. So if he's making a statement like this, then who is Pakistan nuclear command authority resting with? Is it with Munir or the civilian authorities? I am raising this point purposely because the world must watch what is happening, must take note of the fact as to what is being stated from where, who's speaking. So basic aim and idea is to put pressure on India in order to address the current geopolitical situation so that India is made to bend. I'm afraid nothing can actually compel India to bend. India is a civilizational power. No amount of pressure or any amount of bully is going to make India bend and be flexible when it is going beyond its morals and the principles of its civilizational existence.
And Major General, with now you've also mentioned, but Pakistan's Munir's speech, omitting those remarks, and then so who has this kind of authority to say such remarks, and what does this say about the potential differences within Pakistan's leadership or efforts to control the narrative?
That is precisely the question. You see, to answer your question in short, in brief, I would say the countries in the world, they have an army, but Pakistan is an exception. Pakistan, the army has a country that is called as Pakistan. So under these circumstances, it's very difficult to decipher and point as to who would be having his finger on the basic command, control, coordination authority. Generally, the nuclear command authority, it rests with the one approving authority. There is one initiating authority and there is an intermediate authority who recommends. At least there is a triangular body who have to approve before the button of nuclear weapon is pressed. But that apart, let me also tell Pakistan and also other forces inimical to India's growth that if Pakistan can wipe out and threaten to wipe out half of the world or mankind, then India has got means and methods to ensure that prevention is better than cure. India has the capability to prevent occurrence of a threat the way it has been stated by Field Marshal Munir. If push comes to shove, the nuclear doctrine of India, which is resting on the paradigm of second strike capability, that is no force use, can be revised and made comparable with the first use doctrine of Pakistan. Back to you, Asim.
And building on your answer, Major General Sudhakarji, so do you think this to not escalate tensions further in this region, and including the fact that both of countries hold nuclear weapon, what steps can be taken to prevent such rhetoric from leading to more dangerous situation?
Between Pakistan and India, we have an agreement based on which I think early part of every January, 1st of January if I'm not wrong, some data and information about the civilian nuclear installations are exchanged. There is nothing to indicate about the military nuclear hardware. So under the circumstances, first and foremost thing, neither of the parties are aware as to where the military nuclear hardware are being kept, the silos are not known. So your question is essentially pointing to which is the authority which can bring some kind of semblance of order and rationality and diffuse or prevent escalation of the situation. In my opinion, there is a global body, United Nations Security Council. There is a United Nations General Assembly. There is an International Atomic Energy Agency, although I am conscious and aware of the fact that Atomic Energy Agency is responsible for civilian installation. But still, for such kind of Sabre rattling to be prevented from further spiral and expansion, I am sure the P5 countries.
Thank you very much. Major General Sudhakarji, sorry we have run out of time for this discussion, but thank you always for joining us and sharing your insight. Well, this is all we have time for. We will continue